The transport ship docked at Argus 7 with a low hum that echoed through the metal walls of the station. Commander Vreknar stood near the airlock, waiting for the doors to open. His 4 eyes scanned the dull gray interior of the human station with little interest. He had seen better. He had seen worse. This place was simply ordinary. Vreknar was tall by any standard. He stood nearly 8 feet high, and his body was covered in thick plates of natural armor that had taken centuries of evolution to perfect. His species, the Tor-Van, were known across the galaxy as conquerors. They had built an empire that stretched across 300 star systems, and they had done it through war. Vreknar himself had fought in 32 military campaigns. He carried the ceremonial scars of 100 victories on his chest plate, each one cut into his armor by his own hand after battle. He was old by Tor-Van standards. Nearly 400 years had passed since his birth, and in that time he had killed more enemies than he could count. He had watched worlds burn. He had stood on the bridges of warships as they tore through enemy fleets. He had earned every title and every honor his people could give. And now, he had been sent to this small station to meet with humans. The airlock doors slid open, and Vreknar stepped through. 2 humans stood waiting for him on the other side. They were small. That was the first thing he noticed. The taller one barely reached his chest, and the shorter one came up to his stomach. Their skin was soft and pink, without any armor or natural protection. Their eyes were simple and forward-facing, giving them limited vision. They had no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons of any kind. Vreknar felt a familiar sense of disappointment. He had read the reports about humans before coming here. He knew they were a young species, barely a few thousand years into their civilization. They had only discovered space travel in the last few centuries. They were weak, fragile, and short-lived. Most humans died before they reached 100 years old. And yet, the Tor-Van High Command had sent him here to evaluate them as potential military allies. The Hollow Swarm, a race of mindless predators that consumed everything in their path, had become a threat to both Tor-Van and human territory. The High Command believed that an alliance might be useful. Vreknar believed the High Command was wasting his time. The taller human stepped forward and raised his hand in greeting. He had brown hair cut short and a face that showed signs of age, though by human standards, he was probably still young. His uniform was neat and clean, decorated with symbols that Vreknar assumed represented his rank. "Commander Vreknar," the human said, "welcome to Argus 7. I'm Captain Jake Morrison. This is my second-in-command, Lieutenant Katie Brennan." The shorter human, a female with red hair tied back behind her head, nodded at him. Her eyes were sharp and watchful. She did not smile. Vreknar looked at them both for a long moment. He did not return the greeting. Among his people, respect was earned through combat, not through words. These humans had done nothing to earn his respect. "I am here to observe your military operations," Vreknar said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "The High Command wishes to know if your species is capable of fighting alongside the Tor-Van." Jake Morrison did not seem bothered by his cold tone. He simply nodded and gestured toward the corridor behind him. "Of course, Commander. We have prepared a full briefing for you. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to the command center." Vreknar followed the 2 humans through the station. The corridors were narrow and cramped compared to Tor-Van vessels. The lights were dim, and the air smelled strange. Everything about this place felt small and fragile, just like the beings who had built it. As they walked, Vreknar studied the humans they passed. Soldiers in uniform moved through the hallways, carrying equipment and talking among themselves. Some of them glanced at Vreknar with curiosity, but none of them seemed afraid. That surprised him slightly. Most species showed fear when they saw a Torvan warrior. These humans simply looked at him and continued on their way. Interesting, he thought, but not impressive. They reached the command center, a circular room filled with screens and control panels. A large window on one side showed the stars outside the station. Several human officers stood around a central table, looking at maps and data displays. Jake led Vreknar to the table and began explaining their current military situation. He talked about troop numbers, weapon systems, defensive positions, and supply lines. Vreknar listened with half his attention. The information was adequate, but unremarkable. The humans had a small fleet and limited resources. Their weapons were primitive compared to Torvan technology. Their soldiers were numerous, but physically weak. As the briefing continued, Vreknar found his mind wandering. He thought about his own battles, his own victories. He remembered the wars he had fought against species far stronger than these humans. He remembered enemies with claws that could cut through metal, enemies with poison that could kill in seconds, enemies with minds that could control the thoughts of others. He had defeated them all. What could these soft, fragile creatures possibly offer in a war against the hollow swarm? Katie Brennan seemed to notice his lack of interest. She stopped the briefing and looked at him directly. "Commander, do you have questions about our capabilities?" Vreknar turned his 4 eyes toward her. He decided to be honest. "I have seen enough," he said. "Your species lacks natural armor. You require artificial suits to survive in hostile environments. Your healing is slow. Your senses are limited. Your lives are short." He paused. "I do not understand how you have survived in space at all." The room went quiet. The human officers looked at each other with expressions Vreknar could not read. Jake Morrison's face remained calm, but there was something in his eyes that had not been there before. "We've managed," Jake said simply. Vreknar made a sound that might have been a laugh among his people. "Managed," he repeated. "The galaxy is filled with predators and conquerors, species that have been fighting wars for millions of years, and you have managed." Katie stepped closer to him. She was so small compared to him, but she did not look away from his gaze. "Commander," she said, "our species has been at war for most of our history. We have fought each other and we have fought others. We are still here." Vreknar looked down at her. For a moment he almost felt something like curiosity, but then he pushed it aside. Words were easy. Claims were easy. He had heard countless species boast about their strength before he crushed them. "We shall see," he said. "Show me your warriors in action. Then I will judge if you are worthy of alliance with the Torvan." Jake and Katie exchanged a glance. Something passed between them that Vreknar did not understand. "Very well, Commander," Jake said. "We have something to show you. But I warn you it may not be what you expect." Vreknar said nothing. He simply waited. He had seen everything the galaxy had to offer. He doubted these small, soft creatures could show him anything new. He was wrong. The strategic briefing room was smaller than the command center, with a single long table and chairs designed for human bodies. Vreknar did not sit. His kind rarely did. He stood at the end of the table, his massive form casting a shadow across the maps and screens spread out before him. Jake Morrison and Katie Brennan sat across from him, along with 2 other officers whose names Vreknar had already forgotten. They were showing him records of human military engagements, battle reports, and video footage from various conflicts. Vreknar watched it all with growing disinterest. The humans fought with guns and explosives. Weapons that the Torvan had abandoned centuries ago for more advanced technology. Their tactics were simple. Their formations were basic. When they were injured, they fell and did not get back up. When they were outnumbered, they retreated. Everything he saw confirmed what he had already believed. These creatures were not warriors. They were prey pretending to be predators. After 2 hours of briefings, Reknar raised one of his armored hands. "Enough," he said. "I have seen your weapons and your tactics. I have a question." Jake nodded. "Go ahead, Commander." Reknar leaned forward slightly, his 4 eyes fixed on the humans before him. "Your bodies are weak," he said. "You have no armor. A single strike from a swarm drone would tear through your flesh. You have no regeneration. When you lose a limb, it does not grow back. Your eyes cannot see in darkness. Your ears cannot hear across distances. You need machines to breathe in space, machines to keep you warm, machines to keep you alive." He paused, letting his words settle in the air. "The hollow swarm has destroyed species far stronger than you. They have consumed worlds defended by warriors with natural weapons, natural armor, natural healing. How do you expect to fight them? How have you survived at all?" The room was silent for a long moment. Katie Brennan's jaw tightened. The 2 other officers looked uncomfortable, but Jake Morrison simply sat back in his chair and folded his hands on the table. "Commander," Jake said, "I understand your concerns. By the standards of most species in the galaxy, we are physically inferior. That is true." Reknar made a rumbling sound of agreement. "But," Jake continued, "physical strength is not everything. We have other qualities." Reknar almost laughed. "Qualities? What qualities can replace armor and claws and regeneration? What qualities can stop a swarm drone from tearing out your throat?" Katie spoke up, her voice harder than before. "Stubbornness, for one." Reknar turned his gaze toward her. "Stubbornness is not a weapon." "You might be surprised," she said. Reknar shook his head slowly. His armor plates scraped against each other with the movement. "I have fought against many species who believed their spirit could overcome their weakness. They are all dead now. The universe does not reward courage, it rewards strength." Jake glanced at Katie, then back at Reknar. "Commander, have you read the reports from the Battle of Kepler Station?" Reknar thought for a moment. The name was familiar. He had scanned through human military records before arriving at Argus 7. "Yes," he said. "A minor engagement. A small garrison held a station against swarm forces until reinforcements arrived. The report listed it as a successful defense." Katie made a sound that might have been a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "A minor engagement," she repeated. "Is that what the report said?" "It described a small force holding a position for several days," Reknar said. "Such things happen in war. It is not remarkable." Jake and Katie looked at each other again. That same silent communication passed between them that Reknar had noticed before. He found it irritating. Among the Torvan, warriors spoke their thoughts openly. This human habit of unspoken meaning was strange and unnecessary. "Commander," Jake said slowly, "the official report you read was a summary. It contained only the basic facts. It did not contain the details of what actually happened at Kepler Station." Reknar's interest stirred slightly. "And what did happen?" Katie leaned forward. Her eyes were fixed on his, and there was something in them that Reknar had not seen before. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was something else entirely. 43 soldiers, she said. That was our garrison. 43 men and women stationed at a mining outpost on the edge of human space. They were not special forces. They were not elite warriors. They were ordinary soldiers doing ordinary work. Vreknar listened. The swarm attacked with over 2,000 drones. The station's communications were jammed in the first wave. The reactor was damaged. Power failed. Life support failed. The temperature dropped below freezing within hours. Jake picked up the story. Reinforcements were 9 days away. The garrison knew this. They knew that no one was coming to save them. They knew that they were outnumbered 50-1 by an enemy that does not negotiate, does not retreat, and does not stop. Vreknar straightened slightly. The numbers were worse than he had assumed. For 11 days, Katie said, they fought, in darkness, in cold, without power, without proper weapons, without hope of rescue. They fought with everything they had, and when that ran out, they fought with whatever they could find. Vreknar was quiet for a moment. The story was beginning to interest him, though he was not sure why. "How many survived?" he asked. 7, Katie said. 7 soldiers walked out of that station alive, or rather, they were carried out. None of them could walk by then. Vreknar considered this. The Torvan had fought many battles with similar odds. Sometimes they won, sometimes they lost. But his people had advantages that humans did not. They could regenerate from wounds that would kill most species. They could survive without air for hours. They could see in total darkness. Even in the worst situations, a Torvan warrior had tools to survive. These humans had none of that. "Your soldiers held for 11 days against 2,000 enemies," Vreknar said, slowly, "with no power, no support, and no natural advantages." "Yes," Jake said. "How?" The question came out before Vreknar could stop it. He realized, with some surprise, that he genuinely wanted to know the answer. Katie stood up from her chair. "That is not something I can explain in a briefing room, Commander. If you want to understand what happened at Kepler Station, you need to hear it from someone who was there." Vreknar looked at her. For the first time since arriving at Argus 7, he felt something other than boredom and contempt. He felt curiosity. "There are survivors here?" he asked. Jake nodded. "Several of them are still recovering in our medical wing. One of them has agreed to speak with you if you want to hear his account." Vreknar thought about refusing. He thought about dismissing the whole thing as human exaggeration, as weak creatures trying to make themselves seem stronger than they were. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was the look in Katie's eyes. Perhaps it was the quiet certainty in Jake's voice. Perhaps it was simply the numbers, which did not add up in any way he understood. 43 against 2,000. 11 days without power or support. 7 survivors. "Take me to him," Vreknar said. Katie nodded and walked toward the door. Jake followed. Vreknar moved behind them, his heavy footsteps echoing in the corridor. He still did not believe these humans were worthy of alliance with the Torvan. But he was beginning to suspect that there was more to their story than he had realized. And if there was one thing Vreknar respected, it was a good story of war. He would listen, and then he would judge. The medical wing of Argus 7 was quiet. The lights were soft, and the air smelled of chemicals that Vreknar did not recognize. Human medical staff moved between beds and equipment, checking on patients and adjusting machines. They glanced at Vreknar as he passed, but said nothing. Jake and Katie led him through a series of corridors until they reached a private room at the end of the wing. The door was closed. Katie stopped and turned to face Vreknar. "Before we go in," she said, "I need you to understand something. The man you are about to meet went through something that most people cannot imagine. He agreed to speak with you because he believes it is important, but I expect you to treat him with respect." Freknar looked down at her. Her voice was hard and her eyes were harder. He realized that this small human female was not afraid of him at all. She was protecting someone she cared about, and she would stand against him if she had to. It was almost impressive. "I am a warrior," Freknar said. "I know how to speak to other warriors." Katie studied him for a moment, then nodded. She opened the door. The room inside was small and simple. A bed sat against one wall, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed softly. A window on the far side showed the stars outside the station, and in a chair by the window sat a young human male. He was thin. That was the first thing Freknar noticed. His body looked weak, like he had not eaten properly in a long time. His skin was pale, and his eyes had dark circles beneath them. Burn scars covered the left side of his face and neck, twisting the skin into rough patterns. His left arm ended just below the elbow, the stump wrapped in clean white bandages. But when the young man looked up at Freknar, his eyes were clear and steady. There was no fear in them. There was no anger. There was only a deep, quiet exhaustion that seemed to go beyond the body. "Commander Freknar," Jake said, "this is Sergeant Danny Cole. He was one of the 7 survivors of Kepler Station." Danny did not stand. He simply nodded at Freknar. "They told me you wanted to hear what happened," Danny said. His voice was rough, like he had spent too long breathing smoke. Freknar moved into the room. He was careful not to touch anything. Human medical equipment was fragile, and he did not want to break anything by accident. "I have read the official reports," Freknar said. "They were not detailed." Danny laughed softly. It was a tired sound. "No," he said, "they wouldn't be. The official reports don't include the parts that keep you awake at night." Freknar found a space near the wall and stood there, his arms crossed over his armored chest. "Then tell me those parts." Danny was quiet for a moment. He looked out the window at the stars, his expression distant. Then he began to speak. "We were a garrison unit, 43 soldiers assigned to protect a mining station at the edge of human territory. It was supposed to be easy duty. The miners dug up ore, we kept watch, and supply ships came every few weeks to pick up the cargo. Nothing ever happened out there. That's why they sent us." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "The swarm came without warning. One minute the sensors were clear. The next there were ships everywhere, hundreds of them. They hit the station before we could even get to our weapons." Freknar listened in silence. He had seen swarm attacks before. They were brutal and efficient. The drones moved like a single organism, overwhelming defenders with numbers and speed. "The first wave killed 12 of us," Danny continued. "They came through the walls, through the floors, through the ceilings. There was no pattern to it. They just appeared and started killing. By the time we organized a defense, the reactor was damaged and power was failing." "What about communications?" Freknar asked. "Jammed. The swarm have technology that blocks signals. We couldn't reach anyone. We tried for hours, but every frequency was dead. We were alone." Danny shifted in his chair. The movement seemed to cause him pain, but he did not complain. "The temperature started dropping within a few hours. The life support systems were tied to the main reactor. When power failed, everything failed. By the end of the first day, it was below freezing inside the station. We could see our breath. Our fingers went numb. Frostbite started setting in." Freknar tried to imagine it. His species could survive extreme cold, but humans were different. They needed warmth to function. Cold slowed their bodies and eventually killed them. "How did you stay warm?" he asked. Danny's mouth twisted into something that was almost a smile, but not quite. We kept fighting. When you're running and shooting and dragging wounded soldiers through corridors, you stay warm. When you stop, you freeze. So we didn't stop. Jake moved to stand beside Reknar. His face was serious as he listened to Danny's account. "Tell him about the barricades," Jake said. Danny nodded. "We couldn't hold the whole station. It was too big, and there were too many entry points. So we fell back to the central section and built walls. We used everything we could find: furniture, equipment, pieces of the station itself." He paused. "And bodies." Freknar's 4 eyes narrowed. "Bodies. The swarm drones. When we killed them, we didn't have anywhere to put them. So we stacked them. We built walls out of dead drones. They were hard and heavy, and they worked better than most things we had. By day 3, our barricades were mostly made of enemy corpses." The image was vivid in Vreknar's mind. Human soldiers, freezing and exhausted, building walls from the bodies of their enemies. It was practical. It was desperate. It was something a Torvan might do. "What about weapons?" Vreknar asked. "Your ammunition must have run low." "It ran out completely by day 6, Danny said. "We had some grenades left after that, and some of the mining equipment could be used as weapons. Drills. Cutting tools. Things meant to break rocks. They worked on drone armor, too." He held up his remaining hand. It was covered in scars, the fingers slightly crooked from healed breaks. "By day 8, most of us were fighting with metal pipes and whatever we could grab, close quarters, hand to hand. The drones have claws that can cut through steel, and we were blocking them with pieces of furniture and our own arms." Vreknar was silent. He thought of his own battles, his own close combat experiences. He had fought with claws and teeth and armor. These humans had fought with scraps and desperation. "Tell me about the wounded," Vreknar said. Danny's expression changed. The exhaustion in his eyes deepened. "That's the part that still keeps me awake," he said quietly. "We had a medic. His name was Chris Parker. Good man. Calm, under pressure. But there was only so much he could do, with no power, no supplies, and no time." He took a breath. "On day 5, Private Amy Reyes took a claw through the stomach. It went in one side and out the other. She should have died. Any normal person would have died. But Chris packed the wound with bandages made from torn uniforms, sealed it with tape, and Amy got back up." Vreknar leaned forward slightly. "She continued fighting?" "She fought for 3 more days with a hole through her gut. She killed 17 drones in that time. She only stopped when she finally collapsed from blood loss on day 8. And even then, she was still trying to crawl toward the line." The room was very quiet. Katie stood by the door, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Jake had his hands in his pockets, his jaw tight. Vreknar looked at Danny Cole, this broken, scarred young human who had survived something that should have been impossible. "Continue," Vreknar said. His voice was softer now. "Tell me what else happened." Danny looked at him. For a moment, something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps. A recognition from one warrior to another. "Are you sure?" Danny asked. "It gets worse." Vreknar nodded. "I am sure." And Danny Cole continued his story. Danny Cole's voice filled the small medical room like smoke, slow and heavy. Vreknar stood motionless against the wall, his 4 eyes fixed on the young soldier. He had stopped thinking about evaluations and reports. He had stopped thinking about anything except the words coming from Danny's mouth. "Day 7 was when we lost Corporal Ben Hartley," Danny said. "He was our heavy weapons guy, big man, strongest in the unit. When things got bad, everyone looked to Ben because he made you feel like maybe we could survive." Danny paused. His hand gripped the arm of his chair, the knuckles white. The drones broke through the east corridor that morning. We thought we had it sealed, but they found a weakness in the wall. They poured through like water through a crack. We fell back, fighting every step. Ben was at the rear, covering our retreat. Vreknar knew what was coming. He had seen similar situations in his own wars. Someone always had to be last. A support beam came down. Part of the ceiling collapsed from all the fighting. Ben got caught underneath. His legs were crushed. We could see the bone. Danny's voice remained steady, but his eyes were looking at something far away. We tried to move the beam, 5 of us pulling with everything we had. But it was too heavy, and the drones were coming. We could hear them in the corridor, getting closer. Ben knew. He could see it on our faces. He stopped. For a moment, Vreknar thought he would not continue. But then Danny took a breath and spoke again. Ben told us to leave him. He said to give him a rifle and whatever grenades we had left. He said he would hold them as long as he could. Vreknar thought of Torvan warriors who had made similar choices. It was honorable to die fighting, to buy time for others with your own life. But a Torvan warrior had armor and regeneration. A Torvan warrior might survive such a last stand. Ben Hartley was human. He had crushed legs and a rifle and a handful of grenades. How long did he hold? Vreknar asked. 6 hours. Danny's voice cracked slightly. We heard the gunfire for 6 hours. Every time it stopped, we thought he was dead. Then it would start again. The grenades went off one by one, spread out over time. He was saving them, using them only when he had to. Katie made a soft sound near the door. Vreknar glanced at her. Her eyes were wet, but she did not look away. When the shooting finally stopped, we sent a scout back to check. The corridor was filled with drone bodies, 87 of them. Ben was still in his position under the beam. He was dead, but his hand was still on his rifle. He died fighting. He never stopped. Vreknar was silent. In his 400 years of life, he had met warriors of many species. He had seen bravery and sacrifice and determination. But this was something different. This was a creature with no armor, no regeneration, no natural weapons, holding a position alone against impossible odds. And not just for minutes, for 6 hours. Tell me more, Vreknar said. His voice had changed. It was no longer demanding or arrogant. It was quiet, almost respectful. Danny nodded slowly. By day 9, there were only 12 of us left. Most of us were wounded. Some couldn't walk. Some couldn't see. The cold and the lack of oxygen were getting to everyone. The station's air was running out. Every breath felt like breathing through a cloth. He touched the burn scars on his face. That's when the fires started. The drones had some kind of weapon that sprayed burning liquid. We think they were trying to force us out of our position. It worked, partly. We had to fall back again, and some of us got caught in the flames. Vreknar looked at Danny's scars with new understanding. Those were not just injuries. They were marks of survival against something that should have killed him. Sergeant Ryan Cooper was our leader by then. Lieutenant Marks died on day 4, so Ryan took command. He was a good leader, calm, smart. He kept us together when everything was falling apart. Danny smiled slightly, but it was a sad smile. On day 9, Ryan took a drone claw through the chest. It punctured his lung. He couldn't breathe right after that. He couldn't even talk normally. Every word came out as a whisper. Vreknar tried to imagine leading soldiers while unable to breathe properly. Among his people, such an injury would be healed within hours. For a human, it was a death sentence. But Ryan didn't stop, Danny said. He kept giving orders. He kept organizing defenses. He kept us fighting. When his voice gave out completely, he used hand signals. When his hands were too shaky from blood loss, he wrote in the dust on the floor. Jake Morrison stepped forward. His voice was rough when he spoke. The rescue team found his last message written on the floor near his body. It said, "Hold the line. Help is coming." Danny nodded. He died standing. On day 10, just a few hours before the rescue ships arrived, he was at the barricade, weapon raised, facing the corridor where the drones were coming. His lung had collapsed. His body had lost too much blood. But he was standing. Freknar felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He was not sure what to call it. It was not fear. It was not admiration. It was something deeper, something that touched the part of him that remembered why he had become a warrior in the first place. When rescue finally came, Danny continued, 7 of us were still alive. 3 were in comas from lack of oxygen. 2 had gone temporarily blind. All of us had injuries that should have killed us. He looked directly at Freknar. The doctors later told me that by all medical standards, I should have died on day 4. The burns, the blood loss, the hypothermia. My body should have shut down, but it didn't. Freknar heard himself ask the question that had been forming in his mind since this story began. "How?" he said. "How did you not die? How did your bodies not simply fail?" Danny was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to explain it to you, Commander. I don't have a scientific answer or a tactical explanation. All I can tell you is what I felt." He leaned forward in his chair. When everything was falling apart, when we were freezing and bleeding and dying, I thought about giving up. Everybody did. It would have been easy. Just stop fighting. Just lie down and let it end. The pain would stop. The fear would stop. Everything would just stop. His eyes met Freknar's. But I couldn't do it. Something inside me wouldn't let me. I kept thinking about Ben under that beam, holding the corridor alone. I kept thinking about Amy with a hole through her stomach, still crawling toward the fight. I kept thinking about Ryan whispering orders through a collapsed lung. Danny's voice grew stronger. If they didn't give up, how could I? If they kept fighting with broken bodies and no hope, what excuse did I have? So I didn't stop. None of us stopped. We just kept going, one moment at a time, one breath at a time, until there were no more moments left. He sat back in his chair, exhausted from the telling. "We didn't survive because we were strong, Commander. We survived because we didn't know how to stop. We didn't know how to quit. Maybe that's stupid. Maybe it's just stubbornness. But it's the only answer I have." Freknar stood in silence. The room felt different now, smaller somehow, but also more important. He looked at Danny Cole, this broken young human who had survived the unsurvivable. And for the first time in centuries, Commander Freknar of the Torvan Empire had nothing to say. Freknar left the medical room without speaking. He walked through the corridors of Argus 7 with heavy steps, his mind struggling to process what he had heard. Jake and Katie followed behind him, keeping a respectful distance. They seemed to understand that he needed time. He found himself in the observation lounge, a large room with a curved window that showed the endless darkness of space. Stars filled the view, cold and distant and eternal. Freknar stood before the window and stared at them, his 4 eyes seeing nothing. 400 years. He had lived for 400 years. He had fought in 32 campaigns across 300 star systems. He had killed enemies beyond counting. He had watched civilizations rise and fall. He had earned every honor his people could give. And in all that time, he had never heard a story like the one Danny Cole had just told him. the humans were weak. That was still true. Their bodies were fragile. They had no natural armor, no regeneration, no claws, no special senses. By every measure that the Torvan used to judge warriors, they were inferior. But they had held Kepler Station for 11 days, 43 soft, breakable creatures against 2,000 swarm drones. No power, no heat, no air, no hope. And they had fought. Not for hours, not for days. For 11 days they had refused to die. Vreknar thought about his own people. The Torvan were strong. They could regenerate from wounds that would kill any other species. They could survive without air for hours. They could see in darkness. They could fight for days without rest. Evolution had made them perfect warriors. But that was exactly the problem. Because they could heal, they never had to endure. Because they could survive, they never had to push beyond survival. They won their battles through strength and technology and numbers, not through will alone. They had never been tested the way the humans at Kepler Station had been tested. Vreknar realized, with a cold feeling in his chest, that he did not know if his people could pass such a test. Could a Torvan warrior fight for 6 hours with crushed legs under a fallen beam? Maybe. Their bodies could handle it. But would they? Would they choose to hold a corridor alone, knowing death was certain, just to buy time for others? Could a Torvan commander lead his soldiers with a collapsed lung, whispering orders through blood and pain until his last breath? Their bodies might survive longer, but would their spirit? Vreknar did not know. And that uncertainty troubled him more than he wanted to admit. Jake Morrison appeared beside him. The human captain stood quietly, looking out at the stars. "Commander," Jake said after a long moment, "do you have questions?" Vreknar turned his head slightly. He looked at this human, this small creature with soft skin and simple eyes. He saw him differently now. "How do you train them?" Vreknar asked. His voice was rough. "How do you teach your soldiers to endure such things?" Jake was quiet for a moment. When he answered, his voice was honest. "We don't." Vreknar's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "There's no training for what happened at Kepler Station. You can't teach someone to fight with a hole through their stomach or to hold a corridor with crushed legs. You can't put that in a manual or a simulation." Jake turned to face Vreknar directly. "The truth is, Commander, we don't know which of our soldiers will break and which will bend. We don't know who will give up and who will keep fighting. It's not something you can predict. It's not something you can measure. It just happens, in the moment, when everything else has failed." Vreknar considered this. Among his people, warriors were evaluated based on physical abilities, combat records, and genetic potential. There were tests and measurements for everything. But there was no test for what Jake was describing. "Then it is random?" Vreknar asked. "Whether a soldier fights or surrenders is simply chance?" Katie stepped forward. She had been standing near the doorway, listening. "Not random," she said, "but not predictable either. It's something in us, something that comes out when there's nothing left." She paused. "Some people call it stubbornness. Some call it courage. Some call it stupidity. We just call it being human." Vreknar turned back to the window. He watched the stars in silence for a long time. He thought about his mission here. He had come to evaluate the humans, to judge whether they were worthy of alliance with the Torvan Empire. He had expected to find a weak species that would be useful only as shields, bodies to throw at the swarm, while Torvan warriors did the real fighting. He had been wrong. These creatures were not shields. They were not pawns. They were something else entirely. Something dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with claws or armor or weapons. They were dangerous because they did not know when to stop. Commander, Jake said, we understand if you still have doubts about an alliance. Our species is young. Our technology is limited. We're not asking for charity. But if you want allies who will stand with you until the end, no matter what the end looks like, then we are here. Vreknar turned to face both humans. Jake Morrison, Katie Brennan, ordinary soldiers of an ordinary species, soft bodies and short lives, and no natural weapons. But something in their eyes reminded him of Danny Cole, that same quiet strength, that same stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Among my people, Vreknar said slowly, there is a title given to warriors who survive against impossible odds. We call them Vrekthal. It means one who would not fall. He paused. In my 400 years of life, I have known only 3 warriors worthy of that name. 3 individuals, out of millions. It is the highest honor a Torvan can receive. Jake and Katie listened in silence. Vreknar looked at them both. Then he did something he had never done before for any species outside his own. He lowered his head in a gesture of respect. Your species has earned that title, he said. Not just the soldiers at Kepler Station. All of you. Every human who carries that same fire inside them. Katie's eyes widened slightly. Jake's expression did not change, but Vreknar could see the effect of his words in the way the man stood a little straighter. I will return to my high command, Vreknar continued. I will give them my evaluation, and I will make a recommendation. He straightened to his full height. I will tell them that the humans are not strong. They are not powerful. They do not have the weapons or the technology or the numbers to match the great empires of the galaxy. By every standard we use to measure warriors, they are inferior. He paused. And then I will tell them that none of that matters, because the humans have something that cannot be measured. They have a fire in them that does not go out. They fight when they should die. They stand when they should fall. They refuse to accept defeat even when defeat is the only logical outcome. Vreknar's voice dropped lower. I will tell them, do not make enemies of the humans. They do not know when they are beaten. They do not know how to die quietly. And that makes them more dangerous than any species we have ever encountered. The observation lounge was silent. Outside the window, the stars continued to burn in the darkness. Jake Morrison extended his hand. It was a human gesture of agreement and respect. Vreknar had seen it before, but had never participated in it. He reached out with his own massive armored hand and wrapped it gently around Jake's. The human's grip was firm, despite his small size. Thank you, Commander, Jake said, for listening, for understanding. Vreknar nodded slowly. Thank you, Captain, for showing me something I did not expect to find. He released Jake's hand and stepped back. I have fought many battles, Vreknar said. I have seen many things, but I think this day will stay with me longer than most. I came here expecting to find weakness. Instead, I found something else. What did you find? Katie asked. Vreknar looked at her. For a moment, he almost smiled. It was not an expression his face was built for, but the intention was there. I found warriors, he said, true warriors, not because of what your bodies can do, but because of what your spirits refuse to accept. He turned and walked toward the door. His heavy footsteps echoed in the quiet room. At the doorway, he stopped and looked back. If the swarm comes for your worlds, he said, the Torvan will stand beside you. Not because we must, not because it is strategic, but because warriors should fight together. And because I want to see what else your species can do when everything tells you to fall, and you choose to keep standing. Then Commander Vreknar of the Torvan Empire walked out of the observation lounge and back toward his ship. And somewhere in a medical room on Argus 7, a broken young soldier named Danny Cole looked out his window at the stars and smiled. The alliance between humans and Torvan was formed 3 weeks later. It would go on to change the balance of power in the galaxy forever, but that is a story for another time. This story is about something simpler. It is about 43 ordinary people who faced impossible odds and refused to give up. It is about the moment when a war-hardened alien warrior who thought he had seen everything learned that true strength has nothing to do with armor or claws or regeneration. True strength is standing up when every part of you wants to fall. And humans, it turns out, are very good at standing up.